I wanted to watch an experimental film, and I definitely got an experimental film. Hey, I'm Amy, and welcome back. Today I will be checking
Andy Warhol vinyl
off the 1001 movie checklist. If you do not know what the 1001 movie checklist or 1001 movie challenge is basically a challenge I've given myself to check every single film off the 1001 movies you must see before you die book. So far, I've checked 173 films off the list. If you want to know more, there's a playlist up there with the intro video and every single film I have checked off in this series so far. As always, let's get started with a short summary. Loosely based on Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, Vinyl tells the story of Victor, a JD, who is betrayed to the police by his sidekick Scum Baby, and after being tortured by the doctor, becomes a useful member of society. This was a very tough film for me to watch. Not because of the content. The story was hard to follow at first because the video that I found of this, which was very difficult to find, it is on YouTube though. It's hard to understand what they're saying because everything is filmed on one, like pretty much one take over two 30-minute reels, and the audio is not the best, but I think that's actually just part of the whole experience. It is definitely an Andy Warhol experimental film. This was made during a period where Andy Warhol was just making film after film after film, and all of them, most of them were fairly lacking in quality. The content though, like, I understand the story of this because I have seen A Clockwork Orange. I haven't read the book, but I do know kind of the gist of what this movie is supposed to be about, so I was able to follow along very easily, but it is very much like a student film, and that is where it really lost me because the student film aspect of it really took away from how much I enjoyed the experimental nature of this, even though a lot of these aspects that make it feel like a student film are what Warhol intended as experimental. So before I get into really diving into that experimental nature, I thought I should talk a little bit about what an experimental film, and this is the definition from Google pretty much of what an experimental film is. It is a mode of filmmaking that rigorously re-evaluates the cinematic conventions and explores non-narrative forms and alternatives to traditional narratives or methods of working. So keep this definition in mind when I go through this list of different things that really made me feel like I was watching a student film, even though it definitely is what Warhol intended to be part of the experimental nature overall. So first up is basically the overall quality of this film. It feels very much like it was shot for pretty much zero budget, and it was just a bunch of friends coming together to make a film, which it kind of was. The main character was Andy Warhol's assistant. There is just some random girl sitting there, which is Edie Sedgwick, his muse. There are also a bunch of other friends of Andy Warhol who play other random characters throughout. Not necessarily like a bad thing, because I have made multiple student films that don't necessarily feel like an experimental film. While a lot of my student films do have a lot of these qualities, some of the acting, location, directing, and cinematography things I will be getting into in a second, they don't have the experimental nature that this film does, so I will give it credit for that. Even though I do say that some of the student filmness of this took me out of the experimental nature, there are some things that you can still tell are very much part of the experimental nature of this film. The first things I will be focusing on are the biggest things that you notice about this film, which is the location that they film in. There's only one location, as well as the cinematography of this. There is one static shot pretty much in the corner of Andy Warhol's New York art studio, and it just felt very cramped and very claustrophobic. The camera is just sitting there, pointing in one direction, framing everything at the same time, and it barely moves. In the beginning, it zooms out, and then towards the end, the last maybe 10 minutes, it zooms in and it's very cropped, and then it zooms back out again. There isn't a lot of cinematography going on throughout this, other than the fact that it is really just sitting there, and then there is a semi-harsh cut at about the 35-minute mark when the first reel of film runs out. And because the camera is pretty much just sitting in the same place over this period of an hour and something minutes, the direction does start to suffer a little bit. And when I say direction, I do mean the direction of Andy Warhol, who directed this film, duh. Throughout the entire film, pretty much the entire cast is within frame at all time, which means that the main character Victor, Dee Dee Sedgwick's side, like just random character, they don't even have her name, I think she's just credited as an extra, the cop, the doctor, the crony scum baby, and a couple other people, they're just sitting in the background, you know, coming in and out, and it gets very claustrophobic and overcrowded, which I understand is kind of what he was going for a little bit. Maybe this is supposed to be a look at like sadomasochism, because later on Victor does get tortured by the doctor. But the fact that Andy Warhol keeps all of these characters in frame at all times just did not work for me. You kind of lose focus of where you're supposed to be looking, even though, you know, you are supposed to really focus on Victor's character, the main character, the whole time. And in the case of the character of the cop, it was a little weird for me because he was sitting there the entire time, like he was a friend of Victor's. So that's what I thought. When Victor was doing this big speech or doing something like slightly comical, he was laughing as if he was one of Victor's friends or cronies, or in the case of A Clockwork Orange, the movie, they call them droogs. But then randomly he just turns out to be the cop, and it just felt a little weird and off. I don't know. Another odd directorial choice I noticed that Warhol made was, instead of having title cards to announce the film and then the cast and other credits towards the end of the film, they had a narrator read off the name of the film at the beginning.
Andy Warhol Vinyl.
And then in the middle of the film, right before the film reel ran out, somebody read off the names of the cast.
Victor is played by Gerard Malanga. Cop is played by J.D. McDermott. The doctor is played by Tosh Carrillo. Scume is played by Robert Olivo. Pug is played by Larry Latreille. The extras are Jacques Cotin and Edie Sedgwick.
And then towards the very end, they did the same thing with all of the technical credits.
The technical assistants are Buddy Wertschafter, George Hampshire, Stuart Shadelsky, Jenny Byrne, Billy Linick, and Roger Trudeau. Scenario by Ronald Cavell. Director Andy Warhol.
It felt very strange, but I did read in an article, it's on my notes on Patreon, the writer of this, who was one of Andy Warhol's frequent collaborators, said that the reason they did this was to make the viewer aware that they were watching a film, not to get too attached to the viewing experience, because the material that they are viewing is a very harsh thing to take in. And finally, on the student filmness of this is the acting. It is very wooden, very awkward, and I was just kind of laughing at some of it. One of the acting choices that the main character Victor made in one scene actually had me giggling a little bit, so that's kind of spoiler alert. The clip, the actor who played the cop forgot his lines a couple times, and he actually seemed at one point to be late for a cue. At the point when I still thought he was one of Victor's friends, he did seem to miss the cue to laugh at a certain point.
Maybe I do not know what I am talking about, but I know I do what I like because I like it.
Because there was this awkward beat after Victor said something like he should have laughed, but then like 5 seconds later he just starts laughing for no reason, and then interspersed throughout some of these other things that happen, he just randomly laughs. It was very strange. And then to kind of wrap this all up before I get to the clip, I can't really talk about a Clockwork Orange visioning without talking about Stanley Kubrick's version of A Clockwork Orange. Even though it has been over 10 years at least since I have seen A Clockwork Orange. It was not my favorite Stanley Kubrick movie and was the reason that I was not a big fan of Kubrick for the longest time until watching The Shining last year. I tried to remember as much as I could to make comparisons between these two, at least to show parallels in their story and how similar they actually were. Kubrick took the ending for his film from the American version of the Clockwork Orange book, and Warhol took his ending, which is a more hopeful ending, from the British version of A Clockwork Orange. Here are some side-by-side comparisons of some scenes that I thought were very similar in nature, that were done maybe in a different way or maybe in similar ways. The first one is really the one that's like the instigator for the entirety of both films. The main character in Warhol's Vinyl, it is Victor, and in A Clockwork Orange, it is Alex. They randomly beat up people for the sake of beating them up.
No, anything but the all up years.
The second one is the characters kind of monologuing about beating people up for the sake of it.
I am a JD. So what? I like to bust things up and carve people up. And I dig the old up yours with plenty of violence, so it's real tasty. And then, if I get busted by the cops, so what?
One thing I could never stand was to see a filthy, dirty old drunkie howling away at the filthy songs of his fathers and going blurp blurp in between, as it might be a filthy old orchestra and his stinking rotten guts. I could never stand to see anyone like that, whatever his age might be, but more especially when he was real old like this one was.
And the one that most people are probably familiar with are the torture sequences where Victor/Alex has to watch some very strange videos in order to try to become a better person.
Tell me what you're looking at now, Victor. I see a JD carving a cross on an old lady's face. Now he is cutting out one of her eyes.
It was the next day, brothers, and I had truly done my best morning and afternoon to play it their way and sit like a horror show cooperative malchick in the chair of torture while they flashed nasty bits of ultra-violence on the screen.
So, with that all out of the way, let's get to the clip. There was not much to choose from in this. It is an hour long and everything looks pretty much the same. Edie Sedgwick just sits in the same place for an hour pretty much, and then at one point moves her hand in and out of the frame. So the clip that I chose was one that just made me giggle because of the dance moves that the main character was doing. For Vinyl. As always, these are just my opinions, but I'd love to know yours in the comments down below. Let me know what you thought of Vinyl, and I don't know how many people have actually seen it, so let me know what you think of A Clockwork Orange. If you want to know which films I have already watched or just follow my progress in general, there's a link in the description with a list of every single film I have checked off so far, or you can check the list on my Letterboxd. I'm also an Amazon affiliate, so if you'd like to start the challenge for yourself, watch the movie I talked about today, which I don't know if you can find on physical copy, or watch a movie I'm going to be talking about next time. There are links in the description, and if you purchase anything from those links, I'll get a little bit of a percentage back that'll help make this channel even better. And for the next film, I think it is becoming somewhat of a tradition for me to be checking spaghetti westerns off the list for Father's Day. So for next time, I will be checking off Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West. But thank you so much for watching. I really truly do appreciate you, whoever you are. Let me know who you are in the comments down below, and let's be friends. If you enjoyed this, leave a like and subscribe if you're new, because I love talking on things, movies, TV shows, filmmaking with mystery, all that fun stuff, and I'll see you next time. Bye!